also recording the webcam just in case something happens here. And also, I think we have Shane Trejo tonight, who unfortunately just had to reboot his computer. He was having some issues with his headset. So I tell you what, while we wait, we have Steve Carra standing by. He's going to talk about all of these issues on the election, also on his own campaign for the 6th Congressional District of Michigan. He is challenging Representative Fred Upton, who, as you might know, was one of the infamous Republicans that voted for Trump's latter impeachment. But we're going to be talking mostly, I think, tonight about the Secretary of State and Michigan's election policy. So I just wanted to play for you a video that someone made about a new issue regarding the Secretary of State. And of course, most people in Michigan associate the Secretary of State with being the place you go to register your car. And that's kind of fallen off the rails in the past year on account of the Corona Chan. And so the Secretary of State recently announced that her offices would be closed until further notice. So before we bring our guests on, I just want to play this video. This is a video that was made by one of our volunteers and our members in Oxford area, and they actually protested against the Secretary of State and her policies, and they're showing you just how bad the situation is, which incidentally I've recently come to experience firsthand from a good friend of mine. He just went to buy a car the other day and discovered he wouldn't be able to get an appointment with the Secretary of State until September. And as it turns out, we actually have a clip of this that someone made. So let me restart the video and put it in the frame so that we can see it here. And here it goes. Check this out, guys. I'm going to pause it here just to say, if you guys can't see this, it's going to be in the YouTube video, so you can rewatch it at higher resolution. But they're trying to book an appointment, and as you'll see here, nothing is working properly. Also, there's a white rectangle to redact something as a personal article that the person didn't want seen. So anyway, we'll just go on with the video here. All right, so, and by the way, Shane and Steve, if you guys couldn't hear the audio for that, it was just some funny music over the background here. But let's bring on our guest tonight. Let's go to Let's go to Steve. And I don't know, did we lose Shane? Is he not here anymore? I saw him pop back in. I don't know if he was having an issue with his headset. I hope he didn't think it was because he couldn't hear the audio in that clip. I don't know, Steve. Did you? Excuse me, Representative. Were you able to hear the audio in that clip?
I hear the audio.
Oh, you did. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully Shane will be joining us back up again soon. And I apologize for calling you Steve, but you and I go way back, man. I remember we first met as when I was working on the Ron Paul campaign, and you were one of our people out in Portage as a county coordinator for Kalamazoo. But and then, of course, more recently, you and I worked together in the state house. But look at you now, man. You're a state representative, and man, have you gone in with a bang there with the lawsuit against the Secretary of State. So why don't you maybe tell the audience a little bit about how this all went down and how you ended up suing Jocelyn Benson for what she was doing, impeding our poll challengers there.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. That was all last year in October. Of course, you put me in front of this concept and concern of poll challengers, and so this lawsuit was regarding the Secretary of State trying to tell everybody that they had to maintain a 6 foot of social distancing as a poll challenger. So when you go to just verify that mistakes aren't being made, whether intentionally or unintentionally, because mistakes happen, that's why poll challengers need to be there to make sure that the election workers aren't making mistakes. And from 6 feet away, you can't read a poll book, you can't see a computer screen, you can't properly verify with that social distancing enforcement. So I filed the lawsuit, and on October 29th won that lawsuit, and that was last year, so right before the November 3rd election. But the problem was, largely throughout the state, in many circumstances, they didn't follow it. Even though they amended the advisory per the one lawsuit, they acted as if they could still do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, I'm not aware that they told anybody that, hey, by the way, we just completely reversed our policy here. I was a poll worker in the city of Detroit, and they certainly never told us that now, after having training us to impede poll challengers with social distancing rules, and then calling the police as a first resort against anybody that complained about it, they never seemed to act on that. And I salute you, by the way, because when we first discovered this, it was only a couple of weeks before the election. And I talked to some attorneys about this, and they said, yeah, if we need to file a suit, we got to file it like right this minute, like in the next day or two. That's how urgent this is, because if we don't file it right away, we're going to blow the deadline. And, I called some other people who were working on campaigns, and they were equivocating and didn't know if they knew all this. And you didn't hesitate. You acted. You're like, yeah, let's do this. And that was so critical, because someone like me, I mean, I was a whistleblower to what we were being trained to do as a poll worker, but that doesn't give me standing. But you were a candidate, and you were the only candidate that was able to come forward and say, yeah, we need to address this policy right this minute. And we might not have been able to even do that had it not been for you getting involved and having done that.
Right. Well, I was happy to step up to plate. I saw something that needed to be done. I was really appreciative that you brought that to my attention, and that we could step up for the people of Michigan. It's unfortunate still that they didn't follow on November 3rd, but still, moving forward, working with the Auditor General, trying to do further investigation to see where people didn't properly get this information out, if it happened at any point, and who should be held accountable. Because if this happened in one or two spots around the state where maybe one election worker didn't get the memo on the amended advisory, mistakes happen. But when poll challengers come forward and they have documentation that says, hey, there was an amended advisory here, and I've got this paper that says there's an amended advisory, and election officials say, oh, well, you can't just show me a Republican Party document and expect us to just listen to what the Republican Party's saying. Well, the Republican Party at TCF Center had people with papers in there saying, hey, this is the advisory changed. If they're trying to tell you to stay 6 feet away, that's not accurate. And that's what created a lot of the tension. I'm sure a lot of your listeners here have probably heard about the tension at the TCF Center. And there's different things certainly that caused it as well. But this was a key ingredient to the tension there at TCF Center, because they were violating the rights of poll challengers.
Yeah. And incredibly, it even seemed that the police themselves were in on it, which is incredible, because the recourse for somebody, if they're if they're being impeded, that's a crime. The answer is for them to be the ones to call the police. But what we saw that what they were actually doing was the police were basically apparently trained to come in and to attack the people who were the victims of having been impeded. And this is still ongoing. And you actually went even farther than that. Uh-oh, I'm seeing there's a stream error here. Let's see here. The stream is disconnected, attempting to reconnect. All right. Hey, Steve, I think we're back. What happened was on my end. I'm not sure why my internet decided to just stop working for no reason.
I'm here.
What we're going to do is we're going to splice the video together. Unfortunately, what that means is we just lost all of our viewers because when it disconnected from YouTube, I had to create a new YouTube event for the stream. And that's extremely frustrating and annoying. And unfortunately, it's part of the problem of living where there is no high-speed internet in my neighborhood. All I have is my phone. And if my phone acts up, there's nothing I can do about it. So we are going to splice everything together, and at least we can put out an email blast. Hey, we still have the video. We have the full interview. And we have the recording of the whole thing. So I guess we'll just pick up where we left off. And I think, go ahead. Oh, okay. So I think what we were talking about was the Detroit leaks and the fact that even after this all happened, what happened at TCF, weeks later, there was a recount. And you were actually a witness to them yet again impeding poll challengers with the Secretary of State's staff present on site. So why don't you tell us what happened there?
Yeah, so Gina Johnson was a candidate for state representative just outside of the Lansing area. And she had a recount done. She had a close margin, just wanted to verify the results.
Sure.
And so she did a recount. And I wasn't there on the first day, but I spoke with Gina later that night. There were these kind of like shower curtain looking, maybe not the outside decorative one, but the inside, screen that's you can see through, but it impaired your vision having to look through that kind of screen because they had the election workers on one side recounting the ballots, and they had the poll challengers on the other side having to look through that screen. So I had heard about that from day one. I had heard about somebody with a health condition who was trying to get in, and they were requiring that they had to wear a face mask, and that
Mm-hmm.
a face shield was not going to be accepted with this person who had a health condition. And so I heard about those things. And so day two, I was like, well, I got to get up there and help with the recount. So I went up there to make sure that I was a witness to all of these things. And sure enough, as I had heard about how it was difficult to look through that screen, I would watch. My recollection from the election workers. I sat at a couple different tables throughout the day,
Yeah.
and they seemed from what I saw, I didn't see any ill intent at the table from their end. I felt that they were genuinely looking to do an honest job with the recount. But I'm looking through this screen as I had heard. It was like looking through water, how it distorts your vision.
Yeah.
And I knew where Gina Johnson's name and her opponent's name was on the ballot, and I knew where the straight ticket Republican vote and straight ticket Democrat vote was on the ballot. So I had the general idea where I was looking to verify that if they said it was a vote for Gina, that I got put into Gina's pile, and if it was a vote for her opponent that I got, or for the Democrat state ticket, that I got put into the other pile. And so I felt that most of the time I felt confident in that what I saw was accurate, but they're going so fast, and it's like you're trying to follow something that's underwater, the way that it impairs your vision. And there were times where I felt bad because I shouldn't be in that position where I need to see that there are no mistakes being made. And it's if I'm 95% sure that they put it into the right pile, and then they're already on to the next one, and I'm trying to keep up looking through this distorted vision. It like I had heard the night before. I went there, saw it in person, and I don't think that people should have to be put in that position trying to to verify the election process. If somebody
Yeah.
is concerned with potential health hazards out in the community, then maybe don't sign up to work that recount to go to one of those tables. They could have found some other people to do it, but we need to make sure that these things are accurate. And I felt that my rights as a poll challenger were violated to a certain extent for me to be able to clearly see with confidence the votes that were for Gina versus her opponent.
Yeah, and that was their intention. It was to make it so that they couldn't see. I mean, let me see if I can find the clip here. Hold on. I think we have it here. Let's here. Let me see if I can cue it up here. Hold on one sec. I think it's at. Let me see here. I think I got the clip right here. All right, let me put this on the screen here.
Challengers and poll watchers. They have to wear a mask and they have to stay 6 feet. That's important because they can come behind your table. But if you don't have 6 feet, they can't come back there. Any questions?
So for 6 feet back, once they have really good vision, they can actually see.
Exactly. Yes, they got really good vision, or they brought their binoculars.
I mean, right there. That's them saying, "Ha ha, we're going to make it so they can't do their jobs. We're going to make it so that they can't see." And that's exactly what you were litigating before the election. And the Secretary of State settled out of court agreeing, yeah, okay, you're right. You got us dead to rights. We got to change our policy. And yet they didn't. They didn't do it for the election 6 days after the settlement where you guys won. And then they didn't do it again weeks later at a recount when the settlement said the challengers have to wear masks to the extent they're medically able to do so. And we had the attorneys, Allison and Granda, on a few weeks ago. And they said they called the Secretary of State. And they said, yeah, we're not going to do anything about this. We are not going to do anything about this. I mean, that to me is willful contempt of their own settlement, their own agreement. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was on the phone with Matt Granda that day, the second day of Gina's recount. And what we were on the phone with, we told them about the screens and things of that nature. But a lot of what I was on the phone with Matt Granda was the gentleman, I think his name was Alex, who is one of Gina's close supporters, who he has the health condition. He wanted to wear the face shield because
Alex Larner.
Okay, Alex
Yep.
Larner. I met him that evening afterward because they would not let him in, and I felt uncomfortable. I wore a mask there because of election integrity. They were very, very strict on the masks, and so I wore the mask in there. And I was driving home later that night after wearing the mask for 6-7 hours, and on my way home, I felt a little bit queasy and uncomfortable a little bit. And I'm like, what is this? And I didn't think about it till the next day. I'm like, wait a second, I was wearing the mask for 7 hours. Like that might be part of what was, I didn't feel abundantly miserable, but I'm not convinced that wearing a mask for 7 hours straight is the healthiest thing an individual can do.
No.
I certainly wasn't used to it. But Alex, who has even worse underlying health conditions than I have, he just wanted to wear a face shield, and they would not let him in. So we were talking with Matt Granda, and they would not let him in. I think the cops called on him actually on day one. If I remember correctly, I wasn't there for day one.
Yeah, and that was also part of their training. In fact, I've got the clip for that as well. So let me just cue that one up here. Hold on, what's going on here? Oh, this is not the original video we're looking at. Well, never mind. But what they have in the video is someone says, well, what if they get loud and obnoxious? And she says, 911. Have them thrown up out of there. I mean, that's what they said to do as a first resort. And never mind, this is a Detroit poll worker training where the Detroit police obviously have nothing better to do on election day. Because crimes don't happen on election day. Emergencies don't occur. Go ahead and use their emergency line. Tell the poll workers 911. Call that number. I mean, it's unreal. It is unreal. So you've got a bill, one of the 7, to enshrine the rights of poll workers, and I think draw even more attention to this issue. And by the way, for our audience, and actually someone in the chat said no email notice was given for this live stream. Actually, we sent an email yesterday. We are on a new stream now because we had some internet problems earlier. Unfortunately, that's how it goes sometimes. We will send out a recompiled video where we put everything together and put that out in an email blast. But anyway, so the 7 bills, this is a huge thing. And this is addressing what is personal to you, is what's been going on with the impeding of poll challengers. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this bill?
Right. We just want to make sure everybody's properly made aware of the poll challengers' rights. And another component of it is to have the badges on the election workers, so that if there are any kind of uncertainties as to what exactly happened, that we can have a proper chain of details to verify what election worker was violating what poll challengers' rights at what time, so that if we ever perhaps need to have a court case moving forward, we can properly identify circumstances that happened on that day.
Yeah, I mean, people tell me all the time, they're like, well, why wasn't anything done about what happened at TCF? And my answer to them is, well, it's not too late for criminal complaints for what happened there. But if you file a criminal complaint, you have to have all the evidence. You need to know exactly what time, you need to know exactly who it was. And it's hard if you don't have any eyewitness testimony besides your own. And a lot of people at TCF maybe weren't prepared for the level of injustice they would face that day, in part because they thought the Secretary of State had settled the matter. And so that's something that we have to go back and address. So I want to bring up your bill here on the screen, but let me just double check that I'm not going to get you out of it. So here, let me do this. I'll put you in the, oh, hold on. I'm going to try to get you over here. There we go. That's not good enough. Hold on. I'm working on this here. Let's see. I'll make myself bigger. Make you bigger. The fun of the internet, right, folks?
And I'm just glad it's you has to do all this and not me. I'd be lost.
Yeah. Well, that's it's not easy. Hold on. Let me switch to the other display here. I think we're on display number 2. Let's see if that's all right. No. Hold on. That's certainly not right. There we go. All right. So here is the bill. And so at the top is just a pre-existing law. And then here we go. This is the new stuff. The curriculum for the accrediting of election officials has to include information on the rights of election challengers to conduct their activities in accordance with Section 733, and that any violation of those rights is a felony. So they're actually, oh, I should probably get hold on. Get the address of the Google Hangout off the screen there. The poll workers have to be told that impeding poll challenges is a felony. That might discourage them a little bit, I think, because that's something they certainly did not know in the first place. And then they're also required to be informed on the requirement that your bill adds that they have to actually wear name tags all day long. So if someone improperly kicks you out of a polling place, you'll be able to identify who it was that did it. And then here's the same thing again for the election workers. And then we'll come back to this little element here because that's something else. That's another important thing. But then we have down here is the badge requirement. They all have to wear their badges at all times. It's a misdemeanor if they don't. Then we're clarifying what the rights of poll challengers are, that they have the right to sit or stand behind the processing table, observing at a reasonable distance, which means a distance where they can actually see what they're supposed to be able to see. Imagine that. Being able to observe the processing of electors. And then getting into the ability to challenge, what it means if they have a good reason to make a challenge. We have that in there. And then also allowing the usage of a phone or other device to record what's going on as long as it does not impede someone's right to vote a secret ballot. And
Yeah, and that's a key point there too.
yep,
Because they say, well, you don't have the proof. You don't have the proof of certain things happening. It's like, well, because we don't have the technology in there. So we're not trying to see how people are voting, right? So that's a key part here. We still want people to be able to vote their secret ballots, and for the recordings not to be covering those things.
sure.
But at the same time, we need to be able to see what are these election workers doing, what violations might be made, and if we can have cameras and video footage. They say, well, you need proof. You need proof. We've got all kinds of evidence. We have sworn affidavits of identity all over the place. Those are good formal documents we have there. But getting these smartphones and stuff in here will help to clarify some of these
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah, the cameras can't lie. And that's so important. And the notion that this is going to impede someone's right to vote a secret ballot is nonsense. First of all, when a voter is in a polling place, they are not supposed to expose their ballot at all. And they have procedures to prevent that. You have a secrecy sleeve, you have a voting booth. And in fact, you're not supposed to actually count a ballot if a voter exposes it to a poll worker. So your right to secrecy relates to how you voted. It's not that you voted. It's a matter of public record. When you cast a ballot, the fact that you showed up to vote is in the record. It's not a secret that you voted. The secret is how you voted. And as long as they're following the proper procedures to keep their ballot in a secrecy sleeve and to fill out the ballot when they're in a private voting booth, then they should not be seen by anybody. And moving on to the next thing also, I think this is also really important. It requires that if they do kick out a poll challenger for any reason, the poll challenger has a right to demand a written explanation from the chairman of the precinct. And they have the right to challenge that. And the entity that supplied the poll challengers has the right to replace them. Because that's another trick they pulled at TCF. They said, sorry, your poll challengers are kicked out, and those were your only poll challengers that you're allowed to have. So you're really covering a lot of the bases here.
Right. Yeah.
So, we hear from a lot of our viewers, and I get this from emails. I get this when I do live appearances. People keep coming back to me and saying, well, what good is changing the law if they're going to break the law? And of course, the answer is, well, we have to make a mechanism for it to be meaningfully enforced. And I think what you've got here really, really does a lot of that.
Yeah, all these different ways of making sure that we preserve the integrity of the election, I think, are critically important. And we've passed some things out of the House already. I would argue maybe nibbling around the edges too much. I want to see things like absentee ballot applications not being sent out unsolicited, the machines not connected to the internet, these things, and not watered down either. We need these things in a very strong way. And if the governor vetoes it, that's on her. And she's going to look really bad if she vetoes these simple, basic concepts to preserve the integrity of the election. So I think that our constituents, the people from our community, should say, hey, don't not do something just because you think the governor's going to veto it. The House and the Senate should still do the right thing, and to ever not pass a bill because we think the governor's just going to veto it, I've never understood that strategy. So we need to press forward.
I agree, man. I never understood it either. I mean, get her on record. Put them on record, formally opposing obvious, simple measures to ensure the integrity of the elections, and let her defend those actions. So I think you guys are taking the exact right approach here, and I think it's important that bills like this get a hearing. And there is a bill similar to this in the state Senate, but this one I think is even stronger. And in particular, this also adds in the uniform signature standard, because this is in the same section of law, and we want to make sure that if we're going to do it once, we'll do it right the first time. But this is another issue where the Secretary of State absolutely just trampled on the existing procedures for signature checks. And so it requires that there have an actual objective signature standard. And that's something that her policy was struck down in the Court of Claims. They said, you can't just say every signature is presumptively valid. And historically, that is not the way it ever used to work. I mean, if you want to go back in history,
Right. It's supposed to match the signature they have on file, and if you turn an absentee ballot with the bad signature, the clerk's supposed to notify you, hey, your signature doesn't match. But
Yeah.
because they have all these absentee ballot applications sent out to all registered voters, so a bunch of people who've already passed away, moved from a house 2 3 decades ago, sending out all these absentee ballot applications all over the place, having the being able to go online to request your absentee ballot with the last four of a social security number, date of birth, and initialing that that's you. Well, I mean, how many parents did that for their 19, 20-year-old kids and had an absentee ballot sent so that their 19, 20-year-old could vote absentee? That's not how it's supposed to work.
No.
It's absentee ballots are meant for elderly people who are serving our country, people who have a reason to be out of state and need to vote absentee. That's the reason for an absentee ballot, not just everybody having it just because for whatever reason they want to vote absentee. A- Absentee voting is ripe for fraud. It's ripe for fraud.
Yeah. And that's why they made it as a last resort for anyone that could not get to the polls on election day. And they used to check the signatures strictly. I mean, as a matter of routine across the whole country. You want to go back in history, guess about which Illinois state senator it was who was able to kick all of his candidates off the ballot because their signatures didn't match. A young fella named Barack Hussein Obama. And I was listening to Robert Barnes give a lecture at Hillsdale, and he made the point that this has been used against candidates in elections across the country for decades, and particularly minor parties, third parties. They would be disqualified from ballot access left and right in many, many, many states because they would challenge their signatures all the time. And that was something that they abused. But in 2020, when they suddenly discovered that because of the coronavirus, Democrats were suddenly much more likely to vote absentee, suddenly all the rules had to change completely. And they couldn't wait around for the legislature to change them because I don't think you guys would have. So the Secretary of State just did that on her own. And that's incredible. The amount of ballots that were impacted by that decision to change the definition of what constitutes a lawfully cast ballot is immeasurable. And it's amazing that they're able to get away with it.
The unilateral decisions that have been made in our state, from the governor to the secretary of state to the attorney general, that it's like they think they can just navigate government operations in whatever way they want to fit their desires. The concept of a U.S. Constitution and a Michigan Constitution being put into place to protect our rights is something that I just don't see how they're working within those purviews. And I know there's disagreements along the way of what is constitutional and what is not, and people have disagreements at times, but they just seem so far removed from working in a constitutional framework that I it's just shocking. It's just shocking.
Yeah. Well, we all salute you for this legislation, and for those of your colleagues, we'll be seeing those come in next week. And by the way, for any of our viewers who are wondering what the timeline is, originally we were looking to have all these bills introduced on Thursday morning with the hope that we would get a hearing this coming Tuesday. However, we discovered that because Tuesday is the day after Memorial Day, and some lawmakers, present company accepted, like to have an extra day off, there is no session on this coming Tuesday. And of course, you have no control over the House calendar. That's what the Speaker does. So there's no committee hearings next Tuesday. So we've got an additional few days to get co-sponsors. And I know we've got a lot of our members who have been signing the petitions urging all of your colleagues to co-sponsor your bill. So hope you guys are able to get a lot of co-sponsors for those, because the constituents are watching, and we've got people from all across the state that are excited to see these bills introduced, excited for hearings coming up, excited to have these issues brought up in the public, and hopefully to have it shown that when a citizen initiated law comes around that does all this and more, that at least your Republican colleagues will be behind them 100%.
Right. Absolutely. Happy to be doing this, Adam. And Thank you for all the work that you've done to help us get to this point, and you've done a lot behind the scenes working with all of this. So appreciate your work.
Well, and thank you for saying so. But I mean, the burden is on you, Representative, because I am not facing re-election. Although maybe that's a good segue because you're facing maybe a different election coming up a little bit more soon than next November. You are challenging one of the few Republican members of the U.S. House of Representatives that went ahead and voted for the second sham impeachment of Donald Trump. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and how that's going.
Yeah, so I live in Southwest Michigan. My state representative district is the Three Rivers, Sturgis, Dowagiac area, and St. Joseph and Cass counties. And I've announced that I'm running in the Republican primary against Fred Upton. Like you said, Fred Upton was one of the 10 Republicans in the House who voted to impeach President Trump regarding January 6th. It's very curious to me how he thinks that the president incited violence, yet I don't ever hear him talking about Maxine Waters inciting violence. So he's a very status quo kind of congressman. I think that he likes to have a label of electability as if he's simply a moderate, and that maybe we don't like him so much because he's more moderate than we'd like, but that makes him a good general election candidate. But I don't think he deserves that label of moderate. I think that the fact that he's a
No.
go along to get along kind of politician, there's not much difference between him and Nancy Pelosi. So if we want people who are going to be doing favors for large donors and special interest groups, then Fred Upton is, he's proven that he's been in longer than I've been alive, and I
Wow.
don't think he's representing Southwest Michigan very well. So
Yeah, I
it's
mean
not
he's
just
he's
about
he's going along and getting along with the Democrats though, but he's pretty far outside the Republican mainstream on this. I mean, for a huge number of people, the impeachment was not just a crass political move by the Democrats. It was also an obscene trampling of the U.S. Constitution. That the definition of what could be impeachable, high crimes and misdemeanors, now applies to constitutionally protected speech in which no incitement was actually even made in the first place. I mean, there was deficiencies in law and in fact. And of course, also the other point that people were making was by the time the whole thing was over, he was no longer in office. I mean,
right.
that you have a federal lawmaker willing to burn the Constitution and thinks he can do it with impunity. And the concern I think that people should have about this also is, the conventional wisdom among the Republican establishment is always support the incumbent, no matter who they are. Always support the nominee, no matter who they are, unless they're Donald Trump. Then go ahead and attack away. We don't need the Speaker of the
Yeah.
House to endorse the nominee for president if his name is Donald Trump in 2016. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
and that's one of the points I want to make too. Is Fred likes to say how you have to grow the party by way of addition. And so he tries to label President Trump as if he's removing people from the Republican Party. It's actually the people like Fred Upton and John Kasich and people of that and Liz Cheney. They're the ones who when it came time to vote for Mitt Romney and John McCain, well, they were all, it's time to unite. If they weren't your primary candidate, it's time to unite. It's time to get behind our Republican now. And so those who were like me, I wasn't excited about Romney or McCain, but I voted for them. And then we actually have somebody who we're excited about, like a Ron Paul or a Donald Trump or somebody who's not a status quo kind of candidate. And where do they go? President Trump brought in so many people to the Republican Party, so many blue collar union workers, people who typically vote Democrat and came across the aisle and voted for President Trump, people who never voted a day before in their life because they see the status quo, Fred Upton, Liz Cheney, uh, Nancy Pelosi's of the world, seeing them doing the bidding of large corporations and special interest groups that grow up around big government. They see things of that nature and they're not impressed by it. And they saw something different, a businessman in President Trump. They saw something special and they voted for him. The losses the Republican Party had from President Trump were caused by your status quo, go along to get along politicians like Fred Upton and people like him who tricked people, who maybe they were more moderate. Maybe Trump wasn't their first choice, but they helped to create a system of anti-Trump Republicans to where I don't ask for Fred Upton to see President Trump as his most favorite candidate,
Mhm.
but it's time to unite. We united behind Romney. We united around McCain. So unite behind Trump and join us. And
Yeah.
that's all I asked from Fred. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it.
Yeah, and I'd make the point also. I mean, obviously, you're absolutely right about the ideological arguments, but the establishment folks, there's also a utility argument to be made here because I mean, first of all, the overwhelming majority of voters on the Republican side supported President Trump, and they saw the sham impeachment for what it was. Now,
Mhm.
you have to imagine if you're working in the National Republican Campaign Committee and you're wargaming what's going to happen in the next election cycle, you got to figure if the Democrats are clever and they're not smart on on policy, but they're sure smart on elections, they would get shadow groups to remind every Republican voter what Fred Upton did when he voted to impeach President Trump. And when he voted more recently, by the way, for that January 6th commission. And they would say, ooh, we could depress Republican turnout immensely in this district. We could take this district if we just get voters, Republican voters, Trump supporting Republicans to stay home. And by that logic, no, I mean, Fred Upton, he's been entrenched in Congress for, as you said, longer than you've been alive. I'm sure he's got a good war chest, but no amount of money is going to drag those voters to the polls if they're not going to support somebody who is this hostile to their candidate, to their champion, to their America First values. I mean, I would argue if I was at the NRCC, and unfortunately people like me are not, that they need to stay out of these primaries because, I mean, if you're able to triumph in a fair fight against Fred Upton, you'll be the one to unite the party, not Upton. Upton's going to be the one that's going to have a real problem getting voters to come out to the polls on November 22.
Right.
And they should not want to lose that seat. So I hope if any of them out there are listening, they at least mind their own business in the primary. And if nothing else, even support you in this, because there's
Yeah.
got to be a message sent that what he has done is beyond the pale. It is indefensible. And they just keep coming back to bite at that apple. To let's attack Trump. Let's attack January 6th. Let's keep bringing up the Democrats' talking points. Sorry, I was on a rant there. Didn't mean to overrule you. Go ahead and let me know what you think about all that.
That's right. Yeah, indefensible. It's an unforgivable offense for so many of us that he voted to impeach President Trump. There's a lot of people who they may not vote for the Democrat. I actually do know some people who've told me they're gonna vote for the Democrat who are extremely conservative just because they're that pissed at Fred Upton.
Yeah.
But there's gonna be a lot of people who just leave it blank in that category because he voted to impeach President Trump. So that doesn't help him with his electability come November. The status quo, go along to get along, kind of big corporation people in the middle that Fred may get. I can get just as many people in the middle because I'm not bought and paid for, and people see that. We may not agree on all the issues, but they see that I'm not picking the winners and losers and doing the special interests for lobbyists and people who want an unfair advantage over the rest of the market. So,
No, you seem to be one of the few genuine conservatives in the freshman class. I see some votes on MichiganVotes.org where they cover these state bills, and it's oftentimes in the no column, it's just you and John Riley and Steve Johnson and not very many others. So you're definitely one of the few that really does put principle over, I think, whatever immediate political concerns are out there for leadership, and that's hard to do, and I know that.
well, and I keep it simple. There's sophomore and third term colleagues who've told me, Steve, I just have a little bit of advice for you, as if I don't know what I'm doing. Just if you want people to vote yes on your bill, I understand that some of these bills may not be your favorite, but if you want them to vote yes on your bill, you need to vote yes on their bills more often, so you can build a relationship with your colleagues. And
Yeah.
I tell them, I'm like, well, if it's a good bill, I vote yes. If it's a bad bill, I vote no. And I've got a pretty good relationship with my colleagues. Uh, an interesting fact too is I haven't looked in the last about month and a half, but through maybe late March or early April, I looked at all of somebody showed me the voting record for all of us, and out of 101 votes, I had voted no 37 times, which was about what I expected. I thought I voted yes about 60% of the time.
Yeah.
And so that's what it turned out to be. And so I asked the staffer who keeps track of all these votes. I was like, just out of curiosity, what's the most no votes of any other Republican? And he looked, and it was John Riley with 24, and Steve Johnson had 18.
And you had
And
over
so
100 by then? Or no, you had 30
out of all-
per, you had, go ahead.
I had 37 no votes out of 101,
Wow.
and Riley had 24, and Johnson had 18.
Yeah.
And so I was like, when I started out the term, there's a representative you may know, Representative Sarah Cambenzi. She's rather
Yeah.
moderate up in the Upper Peninsula. Her district's trending more and more Republican. So in order to hold her seat, she perhaps maybe she generally is moderate, and yeah, she votes with Republicans a lot. So I was like, I think she might actually vote with the Republican majority more often than I do, just because she's moderate, and I vote no because it's not conservative enough for me. And well, it turns out I've voted no more than any of the Democrats. The most no's any Democrat
Wow.
had was 33. And so when it comes to negotiations with the governor, and well, we need to work with the governor. We need to not, she'll never sign these things, and we don't want to offend her. That whole kind of process it doesn't make sense to me. We have people from our side of the aisle who maybe they get involved, and there's one issue that they're really passionate about, but that one issue they're passionate about is a bigger government idea.
Yeah.
And so they want to get that across. And another Republican wants to get another big government idea across. And so they vote yes on these bills for one another's bills, even though they may not agree with it. One might be a school teacher and, want certain situation from that end. Another person maybe it was a road commissioner and thinks that we need more funding. It's just we get bigger. A doctor who thinks we need more money, and so we end up with bigger government is what we're pushing from our side. And
Yeah.
it's like, why are we pushing all these things? Why aren't we pushing a more conservative angle? We had a $62 billion budget last fiscal year. Now we're going to propose a $65 billion budget when we've got $13 billion in federal funding coming in. Why would we increase the state budget $3 billion with $13 billion in federal money coming in?
They're funding the left is what they're doing.
It's
And going back to that point you made earlier about, your colleagues saying they're not going to vote for your bills unless you vote for theirs, which is so improper. And of course, it's usually subconscious and subtle. It's not actually laid out that way, because otherwise it would be a quid pro quo. But
Right.
I remember when Representative Riley first got elected, and I went to work in his office, and my recommendation to him was, John, is vote your conscience. You can always vote your conscience. You can always vote no if you don't like a policy. Just don't do what Justin Amash does and go out and publicly trash your colleagues. As long as you're just, sticking with your principles, you'll be fine. And that was not the case. That was not the case. They do take it personally. And that to me is just so offensive. In fact, you might actually remember this moment because you and I were both staffers at the time, but there was a moment that occurred, I think it was in the term before last, that really shocked me and exposed me just how lousy some people in the legislature could be. And that was when your boss at the time, Representative Steve Johnson, had a bill up. I don't remember what the bill was, but what your colleagues all did was, and for those listeners who aren't familiar with how this works in the legislature, they've got a big board that shows where people are voting and how they're voting as the votes are coming in. So you can see so-and-so's vote yes, so-and-so's vote no, so-and-so hasn't voted yet. And when the bill came up to the board, your colleagues, well, they weren't your colleagues yet, they were Steve Johnson's colleagues, on the Republican side, all voted no. And the board lit up in red, no. They were all voting against his bills. And then after about a minute or two, they flipped them to yes. Because that was their idea of a funny joke. Hey, he votes against our bills, we're going to vote against his. Ha ha ha, how do you like that? I mean, that's how trivial they think this serious business of imposing a law on the entire 10 million people of Michigan is let's just have a joke on the taxpayer's dime. And that just offended me so much. I never forgot it.
Well, but at the end of the day, he has gotten things passed through the House and the
Oh, yeah.
Senate. And so the idea that just because you vote no on their bills, they won't vote yes on yours. they were joking. You know, you vote no all the
Sure.
time. We're gonna act like we're voting no on yours, but they flipped their vote to green. And yeah, I remember the boards were lighting up red and then them flipping to green. So so yeah, no, they're still willing to vote for your bills, and
Well,
so there's
yeah,
that.
but there's and you know how this works. There's whip counts and things that happen behind the scenes sometimes where
There
the
are
bills don't come up for the vote unless they've already got the go ahead. And
there are
and
yeah
and, and there's some bills, and I know Representative Riley has had some that we've seen go nowhere. And I think, well, I'll give you a perfect example. We had a bill vetoed by Rick Snyder, and as far as I could tell, the best I mean, he gave an official reason, but I'm almost certain the real reason was that John voted no on his budgets and his supplementals, and he just wanted to vote no on his bill. And
right.
it's unfortunate that's the way it works sometimes. But anyway,
Sure. Yeah, and something I told Steve Johnson the first day working for him, I told him that besides my day-to-day job in the office, that I felt it was my job to hold him true to his values, not mine, but his. And so I
yeah,
worked for Steve Johnson for 3 years before I had to leave working for him in order to run myself. So it was January 10th of 2020 was my last day working for him, and then I announced running for office in February, shortly after. But yeah, I worked for him for 3 years, and he did a good job. I mean, I think perhaps the influence of having somebody like you or me in the office, I think, is very beneficial for when John Riley came in and he saw you in the office. Steve Johnson saw me in the office. They were both very, very solid guys, and I wasn't going to work for Steve if he was just a status quo kind of guy. And that was the factor that went into my mind when I took the job, because I didn't want to go to Lansing and become part of the problem. But I did want to go
yeah.
to Lansing to gain experience, to see how the system works, to know how it works from the inside. And so I thought, well, my conclusion was I get to gain the experience working for somebody who's a genuine guy. Steve knocked on the doors, won the hearts and minds of his community, did no favors to large donors and special interest groups. Day one, I come in and I say what I said, and and I'm not saying he wouldn't have stayed true to his values without me. Same thing with John Riley, but
Sure.
I think it's very beneficial for them to have us in the office with them.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's like the old saying, personnel is policy. And I think, as much as we supported President Trump, we had a lot of questions about some of the people he hired, and some of the policies appeared to come from the people he hired. And that's why we always encourage people when they become lawmakers to hire as far to their right as they can, so that, because otherwise the status quo is going to be pulling everything to the left always and at all times. So on that note, I wish you the best in your run against Fred Upton, and I hope the grassroots across Southwest Michigan rise up and really give you a fair shake as someone who's not the entrenched incumbent, and see the difference in your policies, see the difference in perhaps even your viability in the November election, because that will be important, and that they vote accordingly. So.
Right.
Best of luck to you, sir. And if there's anything else that we didn't get a chance to cover, there's no particular time period before we have to sign off, although I don't want my phone to crash again. Hopefully that won't happen. But
Yeah.
if there's anything we didn't cover, or anything that's a personal passion of yours, feel free to talk about that. In fact, now that I think of it, I remember you were involved in a pro-life effort last year. But if there's anything else you want to talk about with our viewers while you're here, by all means, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I have 2 points I might make here at the end here. One was with Steve Johnson with his reelections, because he's been up for reelection already. He's in his third term now. And with him, he was ranked the most conservative state representative. And so he had a little bit of a test in the general election, kind of like a 55-45 Republican district.
Sure.
He outperformed every single other Republican in his state representative race from the top of the ticket down. There was not a single Republican who performed better than him, not in the Republican primary, in the general election when it came time to run against a Democrat.
Yeah.
So this idea that a strong conservative can't poll well in a general election is erroneous. People saw Steve, that he's not bought and paid for, that he's a genuine guy, that he actually cares. And maybe they don't agree with him on all the issues, but he explains all of his votes on Facebook. He's straightforward. He's
Yep.
transparent. He's accessible. He's not bought and paid for. those are things that people see high value in, even if they don't agree with you on all the issues. So, sure, I may not be the most moderate guy in the world. I may be more conservative than some people may be. But at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with me on all the issues, but you know that, my heart's in the right place and that that I'm not playing games. And that's just a little bit of encouragement to everybody too, that we certainly do make good general election candidates just standing on principle. And
Yeah.
if people want to know more about me, they can go to carraforcongress.com. It's CARRA for FOR Congress.com.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Representative. We appreciate the time. We will be sure to send you the video once we fix it because of the little technical issue we had earlier there. But hey, that's how it goes in this internet age. So once again, thank you, and to our viewers and listeners, thanks again for all that you do for liberty. Hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we're going to have an exciting week coming up in the House next week. So if you haven't already done so, make sure you sign that petition. We'll make sure there's a link on our homepage so that you can sign it and share it with your friends, because we want to make sure we get as many letters into the House as possible and that we move these bills forward. And hopefully we'll have an announcement coming up in just a few weeks on our proposal to reform Michigan's election law with a citizen initiated legislation. And it's going to include Representative Carra's proposal and probably several others. So in fact, I'm sure it will include several others. So once again, Representative, thanks. And we appreciate you and all that you do for liberty and for our viewers as well. So, all right. Thanks, guys.
Likewise. Thanks, Adam.
All right. Have